It started like any other ordinary morning. Birds chirped. The sun peeked through the curtains. I was sipping my coffee while watching the sprinklers water our perfect green lawn. My wife was upstairs getting ready for her yoga class, and everything felt calm, peaceful, safe. We lived in a quiet neighborhood. The kind where everyone waves when you drive by. The kind where mailboxes are identical. Kids ride bikes in cul-de-sacs, and people compete over who has the cleanest driveway. It wasn't flashy, but it was home. And yeah, we had a homeowners association. You know the type. Strict, a little nosy, but manageable. At least, that's what we thought. They had rules about everything. Paint colors, lawn height. Even how long your garage door could stay open. We didn't love it, but we followed the rules. We paid our dues on time. We went to the occasional meeting. We tried to be good neighbors. Things started to shift around spring. It was subtle at first. A small envelope in the mailbox. Violation notice. It said in bold red letters. Our trash bins were visible from the street for too long. Apparently, we shrugged it off. We fixed it. Then came another notice. This time about a flower bed. The roses, they said, weren't in compliance with HOA landscaping standards. That one stung. My wife had spent hours planning those. They were pride and joy. She tried to argue her case, sent emails, even attached pictures. No one responded. Weeks passed. Then, another envelope. This time it said we owed a fine. For what? The grass was freshly mowed. The driveway had been pressure washed just the weekend before. No explanation. Just a number. We started to feel uneasy. It was like we were being watched. Like someone was looking for reasons to push us out. Still, we stayed calm. We figured it was just a misunderstanding. A system error. Maybe a new board member trying too hard. My wife joked that someone on the HOA board must have really hated roses. We laughed. A little nervously, but we laughed. Until the letter came. It was thicker than the others. Certified mail. I remember holding it in my hands. The paper cool and stiff. I opened it slowly, not even realizing I was holding my breath. Final notice of eviction. My heart dropped. I scanned the letter over and over, thinking it had to be a mistake. We weren't behind on payments. We hadn't damaged property. We hadn't done anything wrong. At least nothing that would justify this. I showed it to my wife. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't speak for a few seconds. Just stared at the paper like she was decoding something far more serious than a housing complaint. We called the HOA office. No answer. We left voicemails. Sent emails. Went to the office in person, only to find it locked. Blinds drawn. Empty. Our neighbors started avoiding us. One lady who always stopped to chat during her evening walks suddenly crossed the street when she saw us. Another neighbor, usually friendly, closed their garage door the moment we stepped outside. It felt like something was brewing. Then, strange cars began parking near our house. Not just once, but regularly. Black SUVs with tinted windows, sitting silently for hours. No one got out. No place we could see. My wife noticed them first. She started taking notes, times photos. She was calm. Too calm. Like she had seen this kind of thing before. I asked her what she thought was going on. She looked at me and said, "They're watching us, but they don't know who they're dealing with." It sent a chill through me. Still, we didn't want to believe things could actually get dangerous. This was a suburban neighborhood, not a spy movie. This was the kind of place where people put inflatable Santas on their lawns in December and host bake sales in the summer. But the pressure kept building. One night, just after dinner, we heard a knock at the door. Not a friendly knock. Not even an impatient one. It was sharp, controlled, almost like it came with a warning. I opened the door slowly. Two men stood there, dressed in black. Bulletproof vests. Radios on their shoulders. Armed. "Sir," one of them said flatly, "we're here to carry out a lawful eviction on behalf of the HOA." For a second, I couldn't speak. My mind was trying to catch up with what I was seeing. This must be a mistake. I finally said, "We've filed appeals. We haven't gotten a court date. You can't just show up with weapons." "We have orders." The man cut me off. "You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises." I looked back at my wife. She was standing at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, calm, still as stone, but her eyes were sharp, focused. She didn't say a word. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She just turned and walked upstairs. I thought she was going to pack a bag, maybe call someone. But then I remembered something. A conversation we had years ago, back when we were just dating. She had mentioned her time in the military, briefly, almost like she didn't want to talk about it. I had let go, thinking it wasn't important. But now, in that moment, it all came rushing back. She was more than just someone who had served. She had been in peacekeeping units, conflict resolution teams, trained to enter high-pressure zones and defuse them before they exploded. She wasn't going upstairs to pack. She was preparing to take control. The two men at the door didn't know any of this. They just stood there, hands near their weapons, repeating their orders like robots. I felt panic rising in my chest. But I didn't move. I waited. A few minutes later, she came back down, slowly, deliberately. Her voice was steady, controlled. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She asked for their names, their authorization documents. She pointed out flaws in their paperwork. She requested the name of their supervisor. The men hesitated, looked at each other. That was the moment I knew they weren't sure anymore, and neither was I, because this wasn't just about flowers, or grass, or trash bins. Something deep was going on, something that would unravel very, very soon. They stood there, frozen for a moment, as if her questions had jammed their script. My wife didn't waver. She didn't raise her voice. She just kept asking calmly, firmly, as if she were still in uniform, commanding a room instead of living room. The taller agent reached into a folder and held up a paper. But she didn't even glance at it. "That's not an eviction order," she said, pointing at the top of the document. "That's an internal notice. It's not signed by a judge. And you're not law enforcement." He blinked, took a step back. His partner shifted his weight uncomfortably. She wasn't just stalling. She was dismantling them, line by line, word by word. I stood behind her, still shocked. These weren't just hired goons. They were some kind of private contractors. Armed, sure, but clearly not trained for this level of calm resistance. "You've been misled," she continued, "and you're about to commit an illegal act. Do you understand what that means for you personally?" That did it. They hesitated. Their whole tone shifted, from aggressive to defensive, then to unsure. They started muttering to each other. One pulled out a radio. "We're going to step outside and make a call," the other said, avoiding eye contact. She nodded. "You do that. And while you're at it, ask them why they sent you to intimidate a veteran and her family over landscaping violations." They backed out, slowly. When the door closed, I exhaled so hard I almost stumbled. She turned to me and said, "We have about 10 minutes before they come back with a decision." I asked her how she knew what to say, how she stayed so calm. She didn't answer right away, just walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder, a thick one, tabs, highlighted sections, copies of every letter, every fine, every violation notice the HOA had ever sent us. "They've been targeting us," she said quietly, systematically, "and they've been breaking protocol the entire time." I looked at the folder, then back at her. "Why us?" She hesitated. For the first time that day, I saw the weight in her eyes. "I think they want this property," she said. "There's been a pattern in this neighborhood. Quiet families suddenly getting fined out of nowhere, then pressured to sell. Then the properties go to cash buyers, usually tied to someone on the HOA board." That was it. That was the game. Not rules. Not community. Greed. The doorbell rang again. This time, there were more of them. 3 SUVs. 6 men. Same uniforms. Same weapons. But now, my wife was ready in a different way. She stepped outside before they could enter. I followed her, barely breathing. "Back away from the door," she said firmly. "You are trespassing on private property, without legal grounds." I recorded everything. I've contacted our attorney, and I've notified the local press. That was a bluff. We hadn't called the press. Not yet, but she said it with such certainty. Even I half believed it. One of the agents started to argue, but the leader raised a hand. "What's your name?" my wife asked him. He told her. She asked for his company's license number. He didn't answer. "That's what I thought," she said. Then she handed him a single page, a cease and desist letter, signed by our lawyer, a close friend she had contacted while I was still staring at the first two men in disbelief. "Leave now," she said, "or face legal consequences. Not just from us, but from the state." They didn't know what to do. These weren't law enforcers. They were paid muscle. They had come expecting to scare us out, but now they were the ones scared. The lead guy crumpled the paper in his hand, but didn't say anything. He turned, walked back to his SUV. The rest followed, and just like that, they were gone. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Inside, my wife sat at the table, opened her laptop, and started typing. She filed official complaints with the State Housing Board. She documented every moment. Names, dates, company info, photographs. "I've been quiet for too long," she said without looking up. "They messed with the wrong house." And I believed her, because what just happened wasn't an argument about weeds. It was an attempted takeover. And they didn't realize the person standing in their way had spent years walking into real war zones and coming out without a scratch. Not because she was violent, but because she knew how to win without firing a single shot. That night, the house felt different. Not quieter. Quieter would have meant peace. It felt alert, alive, like the walls were listening, like the floorboards knew we were on edge. My wife barely touched her dinner. I didn't even try. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of calculation, strategy, and something else I hadn't seen in her before. Fire. She was always strong. But this was different. This was a version of her I'd never met. One who knew how to handle threats without raising her voice. Who carried a kind of invisible authority that made even armed strangers back down. I watched her as she sat cross-legged on the floor. Folders spread around her like maps before a battle. Her laptop glowed in front of her. She was reading contracts, decoding legal codes, tracking down the private security firm that had shown up at our door. She didn't flinch once. No fear, just focus. I finally asked her, really asked, what she used to do. She looked up slowly, then leaned back against the wall. "I was part of a conflict mediation team," she said. "We went into war zones, not to fight, to stop fights before they got worse, before they turned into full-scale disasters." She paused and added, "I've sat across from warlords, armed men, people who'd already killed. You learn pretty quickly how to hold your ground." I stared at her, the woman I married, the one who used to talk about gardening in school board meetings. She had walked through war zones while I was still figuring out spreadsheets and deadlines. "So when those guys showed up today," I said slowly, "you weren't surprised?" "No," she said. "I was ready." It hit me then. She wasn't just reacting. She had seen this pattern before. Intimidation, manipulation, people using power. They didn't have to get what they wanted. She had learned how to read people like maps. She could spot the weak spots, the cracks in the armor. The difference now was this war was in our front yard. I sat down beside her. The files, the photos, the letters, they were all evidence, pieces of something bigger, something deliberate. "They're running a scheme," she said, tapping one of the printed emails. "Look, same law firm name on 3 different evictions from this neighborhood. And this firm, owned by the HOA president's brother-in-law." She clicked open a property record. Every house that's been fined out and pushed into violation eviction has been sold within 30 days. Cash buyers, LLCs, shell companies. It's a flipping scam disguised as HOA enforcement. I didn't know whether to be furious or terrified. "They thought we'd fold," she said. "Like the others, they didn't expect me to fight back." She stood up and stretched, then said something that sent a chill through me. "I'm going to the next HOA meeting." I looked at her like she was joking, but her face said otherwise. They've kept me off the board for 3 years, she added. They block my nominations, but they can't block my attendance. And now I've got leverage. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. Every chair lined up like church pews. Soft lighting. Quiet murmurs. But the energy in the room shifted the second we walked in. People noticed her. Some leaned in to whisper. Others looked down. A few flat out stared, their faces tight with discomfort. The board sat at the front behind a long table, their name tags in neat plastic holders. The president, a man in his late 50s with a frozen smile, greeted us with forced politeness. "Evening," he said. "Didn't think we'd see you here." My wife didn't smile back. "Oh, we're not going anywhere." They started the meeting with routine announcements, budget reports, upcoming neighborhood events, landscaping schedules. All a show, all distraction. Then she raised her hand. "I have a question about the HOA's authority to enforce evictions using armed private contractors." The room went still. I also have concerns about misuse of power, financial conflict of interest, and targeting specific homeowners without due process. Gasps. Whispers. The board looked rattled. The president tried to shut her down. "Ma'am, that's not on the agenda." "Then add it," she said. "Calm. Sharp." She began reading from the documents. Violations with no supporting photos. Fines issued without prior warnings. Letters that were never mailed through certified post. She even read out the LLC names linked to recent home sales, naming who owned them and who profited. By the time she finished, the room was dead quiet. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse anyone outright. She didn't have to. The facts spoke louder than anger ever could. Afterward, a few neighbors approached us. Quietly, carefully, like they were breaking some kind of unspoken rule. One woman said she'd gotten notices too. Another said her husband had been pressured to make things easy by selling when the fines piled up. My wife just nodded. They count on silence. That's how they win. Over the next few days, she built something stronger than any fence, any HOA regulation, any security guard. She built a network. People who'd never spoken out before started sharing their stories. Photos, emails. Some of them had felt ashamed, embarrassed, like they had done something wrong when they hadn't. She changed that. She taught them how to file formal complaints, how to challenge fines, how to demand proof, legal authority, and documentation. The HOA had been operating like a private empire, but now they were being watched, exposed. I watched her coordinate it all. The calls, the emails, the quiet meetings in driveways and backyards. She didn't wear a uniform, but she led like a commander, not by barking orders, but by inspiring people to take back control. And she never raised her voice once. What struck me most was how human she made it. She didn't talk like a lawyer or a soldier. She just told the truth. And in a neighborhood built on appearances, that was more powerful than any weapon. The HOA pushed back, of course, sent more letters, threatened to fine us again, claimed she was harassing board members. But it was too late. The story was already spreading, beyond the neighborhood, to local news, to advocacy groups, even to a state senator's office. People had questions now, hard questions, the kind that couldn't be brushed off with official-sounding replies. And through it all, she stayed grounded, focused. Sometimes I'd catch her late at night, staring out the window, eyes scanning the dark street. Not out of fear, but calculation. She wasn't scared. She was planning. She once told me something I'll never forget. In conflict zones, the most dangerous person isn't the one with the gun. It's the one with the plan and the will to see it through. And now I finally understood what she meant. Because in this battle, it wasn't about bullets. It was about power, about standing your ground when everyone expects you to back down, about knowing that when you're calm, confident, and prepared, you hold the real weapon, control. The warning came on a Monday morning. A man in a navy suit walked up our driveway like he belonged there. No knock, no doorbell. He just stood by the porch, adjusting his tie, pretending to scroll through his phone. My wife saw him first. She didn't panic. She didn't even blink. "He's from the HOA's legal team," she said flatly. They're testing the water. I watched her walk to the door. Calm. Intentional. She opened it just enough to make her presence known. Can I help you? She asked. He smiled a politician's smile. The kind that looks friendly but never reaches the eyes. We just wanted to make sure there was no misunderstanding, he said. There's been some confusion about the recent actions of the board. She didn't return the smile. There's no confusion, she replied. You tried to legally evict us. You sent armed contractors. You violated half a dozen property laws. He tried to interrupt. She didn't let him. You got 20 seconds to get off my property, she added, stepping fully outside now, or I'll assume you're trespassing. I've already filed complaints with the state housing authority. Your name will be added next. He backed off, slow, calculated, but I saw the crack in his confidence. The weight of what was coming finally starting to register. After he left, my wife didn't speak for a while. She just sat at the kitchen table, flipping through that same folder she'd built like a soldier building a field manual. Her hands were steady, but I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just about us anymore. The neighborhood had woken up. One by one, people started speaking out. An elderly couple 3 blocks over shared that they'd been fined $2,500 for a fence they didn't even install. It had been there when they bought the house. Another woman said her teenage son had been followed by a board member's hired inspector with a camera. Nobody had talked before. But now, it was like the dam had cracked open. Neighbors started meeting weekly, forming what they quietly began calling the resistance. They weren't loud. They weren't reckless. They were organized. And every time my wife showed up to one of those meetings, the energy in the room changed. People sat straighter, asked better questions, took notes. She brought structure, made sure no one acted impulsively, made sure everything was documented, every letter, every call, every intimidation attempt. Then the news broke. It started as a small article in the local paper, a quiet headline, tucked away in a community column. HOA accused of abuse of power, multiple families speak out. But it spread. Within days, the piece had been picked up by a bigger outlet. Then a local TV station came knocking, asking to speak with residents. Cameras started showing up in driveways. Questions started landing in the HOA's inbox like hammers. My wife didn't go on camera. She didn't need to. She gave the reporters the paper trail, the names, the shell companies, the property deeds. She gave them the truth and let them tell it. And then came the hearing. It wasn't held in some courtroom or police station. It was in a plain, echoey hall downtown. Plastic chairs. Fluorescent lights. But the energy in that room could have powered a city. State investigators. Housing officials. Legal observers. And one by one, neighbors stood up, told their stories. Quiet voices. Shaky hands. But truth cuts deeper than shouting ever can. The HOA president showed up with his lawyer, sat stiff in a chair like he was still in charge. But that power he used to swing around like a weapon, it was gone, dismantled, neutralized. And when it was my wife's turn to speak, the entire room went silent. She stood. No notes, no script, just presence. She told them what happened, step by step, detail by detail. No exaggeration, just facts and fire. And then she said something I'll never forget. You don't win a war with weapons, she said. You win it by refusing to be afraid, and by knowing your rights better than they know their own lies. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than clapping ever could be. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. The state announced a formal investigation into the HOA board. 2 members resigned quietly. One was served a subpoena. That private security firm, they vanished. No more trucks. No more late-night patrols. Their website went dark. Their licenses were suddenly under review. And the notices stopped. No more fake violations. No more thinly veiled threats disguised as courtesy reminders. The mailbox was finally just a mailbox again, not a weapon. But what moved me most wasn't just the fallout. It was watching the neighborhood come alive. People who used to nod politely and rush inside now lingered on their porches. They talked, shared coffee, watched each other's kids. They had gone through something terrifying together and made it out on the other side stronger. One woman even brought over a pie, said thank you with tears in her eyes. I was going to sell, she said. I thought I had no choice. Your wife showed me I did. And my wife, she never bragged, never took credit. She just kept going, kept listening, kept making sure no one felt alone in the fight. One evening, weeks after it all calmed down, we sat on the porch. The sun was setting. The street was quiet again, not scared quiet, peaceful quiet. She looked out across the lawns and whispered. They thought they could use fear, but they forgot what happens when you push people too far. I looked at her, the woman I thought I knew, now someone even stronger, even braver than I could have imagined. What happens? I asked. She smiled softly. They push back.